I said concrete plans. While Seosong SB is developing the battery pack and preparing for mass production, we will mine germanium from the moon and bring it to Earth. This is something Space C is working on. The world's largest private space company, Space C, is at the forefront of the lunar resource mining business. I've already told Alan Eberhardt. It doesn't matter how much it costs, so send the spacecraft to the moon as soon as possible. With OTK Company and Space C, we have established a joint venture in the field of electric aircraft and are cooperating. We are expanding this to the space field. Take you added a word. Alan Eberhardt says he will make it a success. He has made the impossible possible. He founded Nikola to usher in the era of electric vehicles, merged a solar power company called Solarland to show the potential of new and renewable energy, and created Space C to usher in a new era of the space industry. Even now his challenge continues. I will build a colony on Mars, I will put 10,000 satellites in low orbit to connect the world, I will make an electric aircraft, etc. Mining of lunar resources is one of them. What he pursues with confidence has a high probability of success. Team leader Jong Ki-hong, who was quietly listening to the conversation because he was not familiar with it, raised his hand. There. But even if the moon is full of rare earths, how do you know where and how much germanium is buried? It would take some time to explore the entire moon. That there will be germanium on the moon is a realm of prediction. However, it is the realm of intelligence that it is the sea of abundance. I've searched as much as possible of the relevant materials, but nothing appears to be anywhere in particular. Exploration of the moon has already been done several times. In the process, exploration of resources on the moon was also carried out, but accurate data were not disclosed. As it relates to the national interest, only a small portion of the information that NASA discloses to the media is thoroughly hidden. In other words, who knows what information no one knows? No worries. I can't tell you the source because it's confidential, but I know roughly where it will be. No one bothered to ask where the information came from. I'm sure everyone thinks you've heard of President Ronald. The President of the United States has access to all sorts of secrets that NASA has collected. The possibilities of the space industry are endless. Perhaps germanium mining will lead to a gold rush into space. Hyunju's older sister said. The problem is time. The world economy is collapsing rapidly. The US is still recovering the dollars it has spread around the world by raising interest rates, and countries that are at their limit are collapsing one after another. The EU is being torn apart, and once the Philippines declares a default, the crisis will spread to other ASEAN countries. And then there will be China. In a situation where it is difficult to pay off debts right away, the space industry, which requires large-scale financial resources, cannot afford it. I nodded. So we have to prevent a financial crisis from happening. Ellie asked, confused. How? I will risk everything I have to fight speculative capital. At my words, everyone except for Taekyu was speechless. It's natural to sound silly. Even if I am the richest person in the world, it would be tantamount to hitting a rock with an egg to go out on my own to prevent the collapse of the global economy. If this were possible, could the global financial crisis have been prevented by a joint venture between Bill Gates and Warren Buffett? This crisis was not created by the Rothschilds alone. It is true that the Rothschilds are taking advantage of the crisis, but once the crisis begins, even they will not be able to stop. The essence of financial crises occurring in countries other than the United States is the foreign exchange crisis. Crisis caused by lack of money can be solved by printing money. But when you run out of dollars, there is no way to take pictures other than the US. To win, you need more money than your opponent, but the flow of dollars is already dominated by speculative forces following the Rothschilds. There are things in the world that can replace dollars, like gold, silver, or petroleum. That will be JN battery for us. I remembered a scene I had seen in a dream. Sheep kills people, finance destroys lives. However, it is not only because of my desire to protect Ellie's hometown and save the world that I have decided to prevent the crisis. There is a very practical reason for this. John Davidson Rockefeller once monopolized more than 90% of the US oil market. I wonder if the company name was Standard Oil? One of the methods he used to monopolize was to seize the means of transport. Standard Oil has formed a cartel with railroad companies to reduce transportation costs by discounting freight rates. Thanks to this, Rockefeller was able to overthrow all of his rivals at an exceptionally low rate and take full control of the oil market. It is space transportation, not land transportation, sea transportation, or air transportation that brings germanium. How many institutions or companies in the world can do this? The space industry requires huge capital and technology accumulated over a long period of time. It is also closely related to the military field. Spaceships are virtually identical in principle to missiles, and reconnaissance and communication satellites are used for military purposes. Therefore, the state invests, develops technology, and thoroughly manages related companies. Private space companies such as SpaceX and Red Origin have transferred NASA technology and are subject to U.S. government monitoring and control throughout their business. In other words, new entry into the space industry is difficult, and the government has to follow the will. Money always rules the world. So whoever controls the financial system controls the world. So the Rothschilds have been enjoying the movie up to now. If the Rothschilds succeed in this, it is unlikely that they will influence the space industry by using money to pressure governments and businesses. If all means of transportation were taken away from the Rothschilds, there would be no way for us to obtain germanium. If this happens, even if JN batteries are commercialized, they will have to rely on Rothschild for all raw materials. Just as the money is more than a bear and a person takes the money, the battery is made by us and the money is taken by the Rothschilds. Senior Sangiop said with a skeptical expression. If you want to build a mining base on the moon to mine germanium, create a route that can be transported stably, and have a full-scale mass production system, won't it take a year at the earliest? Until then, can the global economic collapse be prevented? That's a good point. Unlike finance, the industry takes a long time for money to be invested and recovered. Even if you succeed in mining resources from the moon and bringing them back to Earth, it won't immediately increase your money. No, you have to spend a lot of money to do that. It takes a considerable amount of time to bring germanium from the moon to Earth in large quantities, and to mass produce and sell JN batteries. In fact, it was shortened by 1 year. I don't know if it will take 2 years or 3 years. Do you know what Yap Island is? Taekyu asked. Where is it? Unlike Taekyu, who closed his eyes, everyone seemed to know. Said Ellie. Are you talking about stone currency? Yes. If you are learning monetary economics, you will come across it at least once. As everyone knows, I explained it for Taekyu. Yap Island is a small island at the western end of the Caroline Islands in the western Pacific Ocean. The people who lived on the island used large stones as currency. One of the requirements of money is scarcity. The stones used for trading were rare stones that rarely occur on the island. Taeyong tilted his head. How do you carry it because it is heavy? So I left it at home and made a deal. Sell the fish because I'll give you 1/3 of the stones under the tree in our house, and 1/5 of anyone's house is mine, so let's exchange it for jewelry like this. Aha! There was one richest man in that town. There must have been a very large stone in the house. The funny thing is that there are no stones in that house even after washing your eyes. The stone was somewhere else. Where? In the sea. Huh. His ancestors dreamed of becoming her wealthy, and after wandering the nearby islands, they found a huge stone and loaded it into my boat. However, on the way back he met a storm just in time and he had no choice but to throw stones into the sea to save others. Those who returned to the island all testified that the stone was very large and beautiful and that he was not responsible for throwing it into the sea. The villagers heard the story and granted him ownership of the stone. It didn't matter that the stone was in the sea. Thanks to this, he became the richest man in town, and even his descendants could live without worrying about money. Hearing this, some people may laugh at you saying that there are all these savages, but what do you think is different about modern people? The Bank of Korea has over 100 tons of gold in its foreign exchange reserves. So where is this gold now? Surprisingly, it is in the Bank of England vaults. He thinks that the gold in a foreign country vault more than 8,000 kilometers away is his. So what happens if you sell this gold to Japan? From that moment on, the gold reserves of the Bank of Korea become zero and the gold reserves of the Bank of Japan increase by 100 tons. Gold would still be in the Bank of England. Do you know where the world's largest deposit of gold is? Taeyong answered right away. Fort Knox. Answer. The United States Army Base Fort Knox is located in Kentucky, United States. It is more famous for the federal gold bullion storage than a military base. It is known that Fort Knox holds over 2,000 tons of gold ingots. But few people have actually seen it. Even the countries that have deposited the gold do not verify the gold they are holding, but only show the documents. Isn't there a saying that the United States ate it all up? As the saying goes, there are many conspiracy theories that there is no gold in reality. It was used for war expenses, it was blown away while speculating, it was used to make up for the budget deficit, etc. That's the point. In fact, it doesn't really matter if the gold is there or not. There's no way I'll ever get the gold out of there anyway. The important thing is that many people think there are 2,000 tons of gold in the Photonox vault. So, in reality there are 2,000 tons of gold there. Like a stone in the sea. Banknotes, bonds, stocks, bills, gift certificates, cryptocurrencies, etc. The moment people believe they are valuable, they have value. In this way, the financial system runs through people's beliefs. This is the essence of finance. That is why Chairman Im Jin-young is needed for this plan. Since he is not developing the battery pack himself or making a production line, it may have been enough just to give instructions over the phone in the detention center. However, it is easier to instill trust in people if the chairman of the Susung Group directly leads the whole process. I said, looking at the moon floating outside the window. There is no need to bring all the germanium on the moon to Earth, and there is no need to mass produce and sell JN batteries right away. You just have to convince people that there is a germanium mine on the moon, that there is a way to bring it to Earth, and that JN batteries can be mass-produced. From the day after he was released on bail, Chairman Im Jin-young lived in the research center and Seosong SB factory. One of the lines at Seosong SB Suwon Plant 1 stopped. This is where Seosong SB first built the OTK battery production line. I had a video call with Alan Eberhardt and told them what was going on. The plan to mine expensive resources, including rare earths, by building mines on the moon has only existed as a plan. If he succeeds, it would be a first in the world. When Alan Eberhardt had a clear goal, he went ahead without any hesitation. He doesn't seem to think too much about the possibility of failure. After all, because he is such a person, he must have been able to constantly challenge things that others thought were impossible. Come to think of it, he's been professing to make a home on Mars in 10 years. In comparison, lunar resource mining is much less difficult and realistic. Are you really convinced that there are germaniums in the Sea of Abundance? Yes. I am sure. He said with a smirk. Is this information from Roscosmos? Roscosmos is the Russian space agency. Information related to the lunar resources is not shared with each other as it is a top-secret matter. If NASA doesn't have that information, it's natural to assume that it's got Russian information. I can't tell you the source, but it's solid information. Alan Eberhardt nodded coolly. Then that's it. It doesn't matter who you heard from as long as you are certain. I asked him, how long do you think it will take? We expect about a month. If we had to develop a new spaceship from scratch, it would take at least several years. However, Space C is already operating a shuttle with the International Space Station and has some history of sending rockets to Mars orbit. Alan Eberhardt intends to use the Fat Phoenix rocket to send a spacecraft carrying rovers and mining machines to the moon. Since the recovered rocket is recycled, the launch cost is quite low, about $100 million. This is the cost of launching to the end, and the cost of the spaceship is separate. If you fail, these costs will just be blown into the air. But now, cost isn't an issue. It's time. The current schedule has been pushed forward too much. But even if it succeeds in launching the spacecraft within a month, that is not the end. A spacecraft lands on the moon, finds the location of a germanium mine in the Sea of Abundance, and the mined germanium sample arrives on Earth safely before everything is finished. Can the global economy survive until then? I said, counting the date to myself. Please hurry up. The Rothschild Mansion in Buckinghamshire. All information from all over the world gathered here. Grace Rothschild watched the chaos erupting around the world. The monopoly of the United States, the division of the EU, the declaration of default by emerging countries, the stock market crash, the collapse of real estate, the spread of isolationism and chauvinism, etc. She deduced and analyzed the necessary information and reported it to the Rothschild head of the family, Grant Darrell Rothschild. Grant was lying on her medical bed listening to her granddaughter. Despite being kept alive by the power of modern medicine, he was unable to move his fingers or even speak. All he could do was blink his eyelids. But his eyes were shining brighter than ever. When this is over, his life will end. He has lived for his family all his life, and it was his destiny to die while working for the family until the end. As Grace approached the bed, a mechanical sound came out. After Kong Jin-hoo. Advances in technology have made it possible to convert brain waves into language. The words he wanted to say flowed through the computer installed next to his bed. After he met President Ha Chong-min, Chairman Im Jin-yong was released. Chairman Im Jin-yong's lawyers have requested bail several times in the meantime. Although he did not disclose it directly, he promised to invest 30 trillion won in Korea. In Korea, public opinion was high that bail should be granted in consideration of the influence of the Seosong Group on the national economy. So far, many chaebol presidents have been released like that. However, the judiciary refused to allow the. However, bail was granted despite the conviction at the first trial. This was very unusual. Besides, after Kang Jin-ho, as if to let the world know that she had released her with her hands, she went out to meet her in front of the detention center. Grant also had doubts. Why does Jin-ho Kang need Chairman Im Jin-yong at this point? As the crisis is escalating, they may have done so in order to cooperate with the Seosong Group. But is that really all? A few days later, Grace knew why. JN battery? It is said to be 20 times the capacity of the OTK battery. At her vassal's report, she asked as if she did not understand. If such a thing has been developed, why hasn't it been commercialized sooner? The main ingredient is said to be germanium. Germanium is the rarest of the rare earths and the most expensive element by weight. Since loamy earth can greatly change the properties of a material even with a small amount, it is used like a vitamin in industry. It was good to say that price competitiveness was abandoned at the time when this was used as the main ingredient. Does the fact that even the chairman of the Seosong Group take out and pursue work means that he has found a way to obtain germanium? At first she thought about the possibility that she might have found the mine after the earthquake. But that was extremely rare. Even if she found mass-burdened mines, germanium costs more than $100 per gram to extract the pure substance. You can solve the quantity but not the price. So what is he thinking? In order to find out Jin-ho Kang's purpose, she paid attention to what was happening in the companies related to OTK company. She then immediately noticed that she noticed something strange. This is the request for approval of Space C's exploration of the moon. Alan Everhart hastened preparations for Pat Phoenix's launch, even changing her existing launch schedules. Why is Space C doing an unplanned lunar exploration at this point? Is this also related to Kang Jin-ho? She had a feeling that these two seemingly unrelated things might be connected. After thinking for a while, Grace realized something and cried out, "I'm planning to mine germanium from the moon." She immediately shared her thoughts with her grandfather. Had others heard, she would have sneered that it was an absurd plan. Because we don't know if germanium mines really exist on the moon, and if so, where they exist. But when it comes to what Jin-ho Kang does, it is a different story. There is only one reason why he suddenly pursues work," said Grant. "You seem to have seen the future. It is only with his own abilities that this absurd plan can become a reality." Grace Rothschild was amazing. OTK company, as everyone knows, has grown through finance. By the way, are you going to deal with us as industrial capital, not financial capital? The OTK battery, which has only doubled the capacity of the existing battery, has revolutionized the industry. But what will happen when a battery with 20 times more capacity is released? It will truly revolutionize beyond innovation. In addition, this work was highly likely to act as a catalyst to promote the space industry. Germanium is not of great value by itself. Germanium is traded 4 times more expensive than gold because of its rarity. If the supply increases as mining and transportation are possible on the moon, it is normal for the price to plummet. But if you make a battery out of it, it's a different story. JN batteries will be traded like gold or oil in the future. If the lunar resource mining, which existed only as a plan, succeeds, the era of full-scale space development will open. If the world finds a new growth engine, it will be able to overcome the current crisis. Really, this was unexpected. I thought I'd considered all the variables, but I'm sure these variables were still there. What is the value of JN batteries? $1 trillion? $2 trillion? Even if the project succeeds, the assets after the earthquake do not immediately increase. But people will think that Jin-ho Kang has enough money. If that happens, everything the Rothschilds had been planning for so long would be shattered. As the world's wealth increases, so does the destructive power of the financial crisis. This crisis was designed by Rothschild with all his might. If they don't succeed, even if they succeed, if they don't deal with the situation after that, the Rothschilds will suffer a fatal blow as well. Grace felt as if all the energy in his body was draining away. But he soon regained his composure and made a cold judgment. Jin Hukong has already shown his hand. If you know what your opponent is trying to do, you can block or use it against them. Grace mumbled softly. It's geratinium. At present, only NASA and a few private space companies have transferred the technology to the moon with the capital and technology to mine it by sending a spacecraft to the moon. Even after that, huge investment in technology are needed to build mines and bases on the moon in earnest, and for transport ships to come and go. The Rothschilds have reigned at the pinnacle of global finance for 250 years after Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the progenitor of the family. However, as time passed, his influence gradually diminished. If I could monopolize the geratinium mines and transport on the moon, could it be that Rothschild films can be continued for hundreds of years in the future? She picked up the receiver and gave instructions. Go ahead with your plan now. Germany's Deutsche Bank went bankrupt. The startled Germans rushed to the bank to withdraw money, but the bank was closed. It was the largest bank bankruptcy in Europe, and it shook not only Germany but Europe and the world as well. It was enough to remind me of the nightmare of Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. The fear of bankruptcies swept the financial sector. ECB President Louis Weidmann has announced that it will provide emergency funds to prevent bank insolvency in Europe. And the German financial authorities have also put all their efforts into dealing with the aftermath of Deutsche Bank's bankruptcy. But before the shock was even over, something great was waiting to make this matter seem trivial. It started with terrorism in Crimea. 22 Ukrainian militias occupied Kerch's city council, taking 38 Russians hostage, demanding the withdrawal of Russian troops from across Ukraine and President Vysotsky's renunciation of Crimea. Of course, Russia cannot comply with this request. In accordance with the principle of no negotiations with terrorists, President Vysotsky immediately ordered the deployment of troops. The Russian army immediately crossed the Crimean Bridge to suppress the terror. After 17 hours of confrontation, the terrorists who were in a corner killed all the hostages and committed suicide themselves. After the Minsk Accords, Russian troops had stopped advancing in Ukraine. This terror, which took place in a situation where peace was barely maintained, was enough to ignite war again. President Vysotsky, who appeared on TV, spoke with a firm expression and a hard voice. Russia declares war on Ukraine. After this time, Ukraine is the enemy of Russia and will pay the price for killing the Russian people. The whole world was shocked by this announcement. After World War II, forced annexation of territories by force became virtually impossible. The only exception is Crimea. In Khrushchev's time, Crimea was a province of the Russian Soviet Republic. He incorporated it into the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Crimea passed to Ukraine, but as Russia continued to exercise de facto control after that, the annexation of Crimea was not strongly opposed in Europe, but Ukraine was a different story. If Ukraine passes, then Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia will be within the range of the Russian army. This was absolutely unacceptable for the EU. NATO Secretary-General Billy Carrington has issued a warning to Russia. If Russia advances towards Kiev, NATO forces will also have to move to support Ukraine. I hope Russia does not make a foolish choice. President Vysotsky, declare war on Ukraine. Start moving from the Russian border area. NATO face-to-face preview. Are the Russian and NATO forces engaged in an all-out war in Ukraine? USA asks both sides to refrain from. Out of the 29 NATO countries, only 15 have declared their participation in the war. Eastern European countries reserved entry. Even if war breaks out in Europe, there will be no U. The biggest crisis in Europe since World War II. Ukrainian people stock up on daily necessities in fear of war. As the crisis in Ukraine escalated, articles poured in non-stop. Russia is crazy. Are you really planning to push Ukraine? No matter how Russian it is, isn't it unreasonable? The opponent is the world's largest military alliance? Haha, NATO is a corpse except for the US anyway. Germany, France, and the Tang Army, there is no answer if the US does not participate in the war. But why is America like that? What Monroe Doctrine? NATO has a Eurofighter. When Eurofighter comes out, it's all over. Is that finished? Su-35 shot. Take this opportunity to push all the remaining stock and store it in the Black Sea. Ask the Eurofighter and go to Rafale. Vysotsky Hyung, this is not the case. Who doesn't need to dry it? What do you do after Kong Jin-hu? Let it dry. The Soviet Union, which once divided the United States and the world, fell and the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. Countries in Eastern Europe, which were at odds with Western Europe, began disarmament in order to make a living. With the establishment of the EU, Europe has realized a political alliance beyond an economic alliance. It is expected that there will be no more wars in Europe, and Germany and France, which were military powers in the past, carried out disarmament. At one time, the German Federal Army was rated as the strongest after the United States, and served as a de facto tanker for NATO. But that too is a thing of the past. The cavalry was disbanded and the tanks were sold to other countries. As a result, Russia failed to adequately respond militarily to the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of eastern Ukraine. But this time it was different. As the Russian army in the border area moved, the Polish army, the main force of NATO, also began to move toward Ukraine. Rumors spread that a French submarine equipped with an SLBM had moved to the Black Sea. There was no way that Turkey would have approved the passage of nuclear submarines through the Bosphorus, so it was highly probable that it was just a rumor. However, the spread of these rumors was proof that the situation was serious. The Russian economy, which had been gradually recovering, collapsed again as emerging countries went bankrupt. The CDS premium soared over 700 bps in a month, and experts predicted a 77% chance of a Russian default. The ruble plummeted day after day, and Russian companies were unable to repay their debts and were engulfed in fear of serial bankruptcy. Russia's external debt stood at $612 billion, far exceeding its foreign exchange reserves of $460 billion. The people of Russia recalled the nightmare of a default in 1998. At that time, even civil servants could not receive their salaries due to the national bankruptcy, and as winter came, many people were freezing to death. The people of the world's largest natural gas-producing country were even frozen to death because they couldn't heat. When this happened, the support base of President Vysotsky, who was like a stronghold, began to shake. The terrorist attacks in Crimea under these circumstances were enough to turn Russia upside down. Takyou asked as if he didn't understand. Isn't Russia already at war with Ukraine? What does it mean to come and declare war now? I shook my head. Strictly speaking, Russia and Ukraine are not at war. Then what about the Russians who entered Ukraine? They are not regular soldiers. Volunteers to support the independence of Novo Russia voluntarily armed themselves and ran. Surprisingly, they even have armored vehicles and surface-to-air missiles. Takyou's expression was lost for words. After all, the same goes for Crimea. Strictly speaking, Crimea was not forcibly taken over Ukraine's territory by Russia. After the Crimean Autonomous Republic declared independence from Ukraine, it applied for accession to the Russian Federation, which Russia waited for and approved. However, the process itself is illegal and has not been recognized internationally, as it is a violation of the Budapest Convention between Russia and Ukraine in the past. In any case, it is an open secret that the Russian regular army is mixed with the volunteers and that they receive support from the Russian government. It's blindfolded, but if you do that, you can pretend that the other person doesn't know. But if war was declared, the story would be different. Failure to do so could lead to an all-out war between the EU and Russia in Ukraine. As the sense of crisis escalated, stock markets in Europe and Russia both plummeted. In Kiev, foreign expatriates continued to flee, and as citizens began to stock up on daily necessities, the marts were empty. I made contact with the Kremlin. After several attempts, I managed to get in touch with President Vysotsky. He asked me in an official voice, "Long time no see. You must be very busy, I'm sorry. I have something I must tell you." "What's going on?" "Please stop the advance on Kiev." President Vysotsky was offended by my words. It is true that we are quite friendly, but that doesn't mean we can cross the line. Because it has to do with Russia's prestige. There is a Russian proverb that says, "It is not a sin to break the horns of a mad cow." Prestige is a very important issue in diplomacy. Russia has the largest territory in the world, is a military power with nuclear weapons, and occupies a seat on the permanent member of the UN. Despite the dissolution of the Soviet Union and various economic crises, it was treated as a brown bear with missing teeth and claws. But Russia was Russia no matter how downfall it was. Even now, economically, there are few countries that can deal with Russia militarily. No one should touch Russia. This was nothing short of a principle. The people want revenge. And as president, I have a duty to listen to the wishes of the people. For a moment I wanted to ask, is a person who respects the people's will a dictatorship? But I endured. If we attack Ukraine, relations with Europe will be irreversible. President Vysotsky raised his voice. What does that matter? Russia has been subjected to unfair sanctions by the West. How long did you think we would endure? You invaded Ukraine first, came to the throat, but he endured it. Of course, President Vysotsky would not think so. He is so blunt in public that he says, there is no country called Ukraine. To the extent that he was so angry, the damage caused by the Western sanctions was enormous. So Russia also accepted the Minsk agreement. Fortunately, the development and sale of the TWR opened up new links with the West, and as the Ukraine crisis subsided, the Russian army was scheduled to withdraw from Donbass and 3 regions sequentially. At the same time, the lifting of economic sanctions and cooperation were scheduled to proceed immediately. President Vysotsky and his close personal acquaintance President Ronald also gave their support, saying, the lifting of sanctions on Russia must be done as soon as possible. But President Ronald was nothing more than the current president of the plant. He has lost his political standing and has lost control of the Fed, not even the Senate and House and even the Republican Party. Moreover, as the EU was also engulfed in chaos, there was an atmosphere that the lifting of sanctions was over. Meanwhile, the Russian economy was in its worst state. The easiest way to quell internal dissatisfaction is to make external enemies. In this case, it is Ukraine. I've been putting up with the anticipation of lifting the sanctions, but there's no sign that the sanctions will be lifted anyway, so you're just going out? Of course, President Vysotsky would not really want war. This was pressure to lift economic sanctions on Russia. However, the EU needs an external enemy due to internal division as well. If it shows that it is being pushed back by Russia, Eastern European countries experiencing an economic crisis may leave. As a result, the EU had no intention of backing down even a single step. I understand what the president is saying. Give me some time. What can you do with time? The current crisis will definitely subside. When that happens, dialogue will be enough to solve this problem. President Vysotsky said sarcastically. Looking at the current situation, do you really think so? Northern Ireland terrorism, People's Liberation Army suppression of Hong Kong protesters, Russian invasion of Ukraine, etc. Was all of this also what the Rothschilds intended? Like it or not, I can't let it be like that. There will be no financial crisis. I will do anything to stop it. Can you take responsibility for that? If things go wrong, I will give up my stake in TWR. This is a sign that I have shown some determination. President Vysotsky's voice softened slightly. How much time do you need? 2 months. There was silence for a while. After a while, President Vysotsky said with a sigh. If there is a situation that shakes Russia even before that, there is nothing I can do about it. The reason he gave up even this much is probably because he believes in me. For now, this is the best I can do. I breathed a sigh of relief inwardly. Does this mean that war is prevented from happening right away? Thank you, President. In Mariupol, a port city on the Black Sea coast, a NATO-Ukrainian coalition and Russian forces were engaged. Both sides refrained from using tanks and missiles to prevent escalation and civilian casualties. Bullets came and went and shells exploded. Gunshots and screams resounded from all sides, and the soldiers who had fallen with blood cried out for help. At that moment I woke up from my dream. When I opened my eyes, I saw Ellie's face. She looked at me and asked, "Did you have another nightmare?" I think so. It was like watching a realistic war movie. If there's a difference, it's not that the actors act, but that people actually die. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. I wiped off the sweat and drank water. I have a lot of nightmares these days. Are you okay? I smiled on purpose. It's okay. Your mother is also very worried. Call me every day to make sure you eat well after sleeping. Come to think of it, I didn't even talk to her mother for several days. She got a lot of calls from all over the world, so she turned off her cell phone and didn't answer incoming calls. Perhaps she can't sleep because she's worried about her son. I need to call you. Ellie, who was looking at me softly, whispered. Thank you. What? For convincing China. I was surprised. How did you know? Then you thought I didn't know? I know everything just by looking at Jinhu's face. It must have been a long time since we had been together. Ellie wrapped her arms around my neck and hugged me. Don't worry too much. Even if something goes wrong, it's not Jinhu's fault. Felt warm and warm. Just holding her like this calmed her heart. President Zhang Pinghua expressed his principled position that Hong Kong's affairs should be resolved by the Hong Kong government. The protests continued every day, but the Hong Kong government was also in an atmosphere to refrain from suppressing the protests. But it is still too early to be reassured. The People's Liberation Army is still stationed in Shenzhen and will take action whenever the situation worsens. The same goes for Russia. Can I really stop all these things? Tianqing Trading, the 9th largest Chinese company, went bankrupt. Tianqing Trading, which started as a small general trading company, expanded its business through an octopus-based business, driven by China's increase in exports and real estate development boom, to include logistics, mines, automobiles, and ports. While the company grew rapidly in size, it was hardly making any profits, but as the global economic downturn overlapped, overseas investment losses increased like a snowball. Tianqing Trading, which had been hiding it through accounting fraud, was exposed through this crisis. The amount of insolvency revealed so far alone exceeded $7 billion. Since Tianqing Trading is a de facto state-owned company with a 61% stake in the local and central governments, I thought the government would provide support as it has always done. However, the Chinese government gave up the support and Tianqing Trading went bankrupt. In the aftermath of this bankruptcy, 2 banks that could not collect their loans went bankrupt. This shows the problems of the Chinese economy as it is. Corporate performance continued to deteriorate even if liquidity was supplied due to overcapacity investment. And if companies that reached their limit went bankrupt, the banks that provided loans would also go bankrupt. As the series of bankruptcies became a reality, rumors spread that the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China (ICBC) could go bankrupt. Industrial and Commercial Bank of China is the largest bank in China and the largest bank in the world. If it goes bankrupt, a shock that cannot be compared to the bankruptcy of Deutsche Bank will strike the world. In effect, it was the collapse of the Chinese financial system. The Chinese financial authorities declared their resolve to prevent bankruptcy no matter what, while cracking down on the media and the internet, but no one believed the word. The series of bankruptcies of Chinese companies and banks following the Philippines moratorium declaration was enough to remind us of the Asian financial crisis. In Korea too, fears of the IMF crisis hit the stock market, and the Kospi fell 7% and the Kosdaq 12%, and a sidecar was triggered. The dollar was running out like a low tide, and there was an emergency to secure the dollar, regardless of whether it was a corporation or a country. I got a call from Henry. After traveling through China and Europe, he went back to the Golden Gate headquarters on Wall Street. Speculative capital that has left the Philippines is moving to China all at once. Sooner or later, an attack on the yuan will begin. What is your goal? We will depreciate at least 30% from now. The yuan was already down 20% from its highs. You're going to attack the foreign exchange market and cut it by another 30%? In a way, speculative forces are not artificially devaluing the yuan. They are just taking advantage of this situation. The values of currencies such as Turkey and Argentina, which have already declared defaults, have plummeted to less than half. There would be no law prohibiting it from being the same in China. The problem is that China has the second largest economy after the US. A halving of the yuan meant that all assets in China, including stocks, bonds, and real estate, would be cut in half. Conversely, for the Chinese, the price of all foreign products doubled. When the yuan plummets, the currencies of emerging countries also depreciate. Corporate and bank credit ratings deteriorate, financing costs rise, and dollar-denominated debt rises in an instant. This will further accelerate the bankruptcy of companies and banks, and will lead the global economy to the abyss of stagnation. In the process, the speculators take astronomical profits and then pick up the cheap assets. And in exchange for lending money to countries in need, they demand the opening of financial markets. Things like conspiracy theories were happening now. In order to buy time, someone has to step in and stop it. Hearing my words, Take You nodded his head. Is that someone us? A new product presentation was held at the OTK company headquarters. Kang Jinhu and Professor Kim Ho-min decided to appear together. Although it was not disclosed in advance what kind of product it was, reporters from inside and outside the country flocked like a cloud. Kang Jinhu looked around the reporters and said, "The reason I have brought you all here is to present a new product." Next, Professor Haman Kim appeared and presented the principle and performance of the JN battery by displaying a PPT. Reporters were astonished. According to the announcement, this is a new technology that will change the world. However, the atmosphere was reversed when the main ingredient was germanium. As IT and battery-specialized reporters gathered, most of them knew roughly what germanium was, and reporters who did not know quickly searched for data. Currently, Seosong SB is preparing for production. Sales will begin as soon as the production line is ready. As soon as the presentation was over, the reporters raised their hands in unison and asked questions. Isn't germanium more than 4 times more expensive than gold today? It's over $200 a gram, so you're making a battery out of it. Aside from economic issues, where are you going to get germanium? Is mass production really possible? Jin Ho Kong replied as if he had expected such a reaction. Someone else will tell you about that. As soon as those words were finished, another person appeared in the presentation room. He was the CEO of Space C. Alan Eberhardt told reporters surprised. We will mine germanium from the moon and bring it back to Earth. At those words, all the reporters were at a loss for words. But Alan Eberhardt took her explanation seriously. When he talked about his specific plans to send a robot capable of exploration and mining to Pat Phoenix, the reporters' expressions changed little by little. In front of dubious reporters, Kong Jin-Hu said with a confident expression, JN battery will change the world in the future. As soon as the germanium mine is confirmed on the moon, we will start selling it immediately. OTK company JN battery announcement. Alan Eberhardt makes a surprise appearance at the presentation. Professor Haman Kim succeeded in developing JN battery following OTK battery. Jin Ho Kong JN battery is the new technology of the future. Space C launches Fat Phoenix next month. How to execute moon mining project? The announcement of the JN battery mass production plan was enough to shake up the world. Companies rushed to inquire about OTK company, and both the media and the internet talked about JN battery all day. What is a JN battery? In the past it was called OTK battery after the company name. This time it looks like it was named after G. Did you not watch the presentation properly? The main ingredient is germanium. Germanium is a JN battery with the element symbol JN. Wow. Really crazy. Instead of lithium ions you slap germanium? Haha, the cost of batteries alone to make one car is over 10 billion. What kind of idiot buys this? This is when the same amount of battery is loaded. Even with only 1/10 of that, it can travel 2,000 kilometers. Still over 1 billion? That's what the current market price is. If you mine germanium from the moon and bring it back to Earth, won't the price drop sharply? Hey, don't you think about the cost of bringing it from the moon to Earth? That would be more expensive. Since the price is the price, it will be used first in fields such as aviation, space and medical care rather than electric vehicles. And then it will become popular when the price goes down. If that performance is true, then there is no need to worry about the battery in the future. Smartphones and laptops can be used for up to a month on a single charge. In the future, subways, trains, ships and airplanes will all be powered by batteries. One battery would do it all. Isn't that about when germanium was mined on the moon? How much is that technology worth? If what Jin Ho Kong said is true, wouldn't it be more than the value of OTK company so far? The announcement of JN battery brought a huge aftermath. All the media covered this as the main news, and there was a debate here and there over the feasibility of this new technology. Global stock markets also temporarily rebounded on expectations of the advent of new technologies and space development. But it didn't take days for this mood to reverse. Experts who appeared on TV expressed negative opinions all at once. Germanium used in JN batteries is 99.99% pure. Even if germanium is mined for free from the moon to the Earth, the cost of refining alone is no longer economical. Technology does not end when it is made. The problem of supply of germanium, yield, price, etc. must all be right before it can be commercialized. It is true that there are rare resources on the moon, including rare earths. But where is it buried and how are you going to mine it? The surface area of the moon is 37.93 million square kilometers. About 1/13 of the Earth's area. It will take at least several decades to explore them all. Even now, new oil fields and gold mines are being discovered somewhere on Earth. How would you rather find it on Earth than on the moon? The mining of lunar resources is bullshit. In theory, anything is possible. It has already been proven through experiments that humans can be sent to Mars. It is also quite possible to make a settlement on Mars. But why isn't NASA doing this? In practice, you never know what problems might arise. If anything was possible, why didn't you do it until now? It would be more realistic to say that I would rather make a battery out of mithril. GaN battery, performance and stability not yet properly proven. Unclear whether commercialization is possible. Germanium purity is key. Resource investment Master Jim Lanners, lunar resource mining impossible within the next 30 years. An unrealistic plan. What is the purpose of Jinhu Kong? Former NASA Director Tom Calvin needs a closer look at the impact it will have on Earth before mining the moon. Moon resources are human assets. An international consensus is needed. Ah, so it is. I've known you since we talked about the moon. I thought I was crazy when I saw the presentation, but you were right. It's amazing that there are people who believe in such things. They're just selling drugs. What can't you do with words? Alan Eberhardt to make a settlement on Mars or Gangjin Huna to mine resources on the moon. That guy is that guy. Saying that, you're collecting a lot of money and doing your best. Where is the temperament of a cheater? Anyway, this time I can't even call it Kong Jinhu. Take you reading the articles and comments, clicked his tongue. Did the Rothschilds do it behind the scenes too? The mainstream media continued to report that it was impossible, and the enthusiasm that had risen after the announcement quickly dissipated. As it is, when a new technology comes out, negative public opinion tends to prevail. This was also the case when cars and smartphones first came out. It's definitely hard to believe just hearing the word. Anyway, there's a public opinion battle over there and we can't stand still. If you believe even a lie, it becomes the truth. Conversely, even if it is true, it becomes a lie if no one believes it. We, too, poured in our money and started a big advertisement about the launch of JN battery. Jung Ji-hong, the PR team leader, ran around frantically. It doesn't matter if the mainstream media doesn't properly write articles. There are many other means of publicity other than the media. Regarding JN battery, the interview videos of Professor Ho-min Kim, Alan Eberhardt, and Chairman Im Jin-yong were sequentially uploaded to YouTube, FaceNote, and Portal sites. People's interest soared and the number of views quickly exceeded 10 million. I couldn't miss it either. I finished my makeup and stood in front of the prepared camera. Do I have to do this too? Taeyong nodded his head vigorously. Other companies are making a lot of fuss when they release smartphones with one more camera and a little higher battery performance, but we have to do something. If JN battery is really good and you have the confidence to make it, shouldn't the CEO directly appeal to the world? This battery is a JN battery. JN battery is the best. Why can't you speak? So for let's say, Ellie, who was next to me, asked. But why am I filming together? Taekyu said it was natural. Doesn't that get more views? A public opinion battle was held over the JN battery. Experts attacked various problems of JN battery. Safety has not been proven. It is impossible to mass produce in a short time. Already enough OTK batteries. The price is too expensive, etc. OTK company countered this by conducting safety tests as soon as the battery pack is made. And Seosong SB countered that it was in the process of making a production line necessary for mass production. Of course, the most controversial issue was the supply and demand of germanium, the main raw material. The lunar resource mining was clearly a groundbreaking method and it was actually being pursued. But few thought that this could be possible right now. NGOs also protested. They were concerned that this might lead to reckless space development projects. In front of the OTK company and Space C headquarters, groups such as the University Association, World Space Protection Organization, and Space Love Society held fierce protests. Stop mining the moon resources. It's not enough to destroy the Earth. Are you going to destroy the moon too? The moon is no one's territory. It is a common resource for mankind. Give a healthy moon to your descendants. After the earthquake, immediately stop trying to mine germanium. As Space C prepares to send a spacecraft to the moon, the situation in China has become increasingly serious. As Henry said, Albert Management and a few hedge funds moved first. It was now an open secret that they were forming a force. They short-sold Chinese stocks all at once. Of course, the proceeds from the stock sale are in RMB. They sold the RMB back to the market and bought dollars. If you do this over and over again, the stock price goes down and the dollar goes up. In other words, it took a short position in the entire country of China. Hedge funds openly announced their positions and gathered power, and global speculative capital followed suit. The media was also involved in this. Hedge funds inflicted huge advertising costs on media companies, and mainstream media around the world all spread the news of China's stock price decline and corporate bankruptcy, fueling a sense of crisis. What can I do to prevent this? The most effective means is to raise interest rates. Raising interest rates could increase the interest burden on speculators and at the same time increase demand for the yuan, stabilizing the exchange rate. However, at this time this means was not available. If interest rates were raised in the current situation, companies and banks that could not pay their debts would go bankrupt one after another. The next best thing is to move against the hedge funds' position. They buy stocks to boost stock prices, release foreign exchange reserves, sell dollars and buy yuan. This causes the stock price to rise and the dollar to fall. In fact, China has had 2 cases of defeating speculative forces in a similar way. In 1998, Hong Kong defended the value of the Hong Kong dollar with its foreign exchange reserves and at the same time changed the rules for short selling in the stock market to defeat the speculators. It raised the yuan and induced a sharp rise in the yuan to feed the speculative forces. Although some countries are wary of excessive government intervention in the market, China has grown into a state-led, planned economy from the beginning. Again, intervention by the financial authorities in the market was a natural step. In order to achieve the current Chinese government's goal, the value of the yuan must be maintained stably. As the exchange rate rises, setbacks on the internationalization of the yuan and the Belt and Road Initiative. Lan Shuqing, the head of China's financial authorities, said that the Chinese Bank Supervisory Commission President Lan Shuqing is speculative. All-out war against the forces was declared. China will fight to the end. Short-selling betting on the RMB will inevitably lead to big losses. However, as bad news continues to erupt at home and abroad, it was difficult to guarantee victory. To win this war, you need more money than your opponent. Currently, China's foreign exchange reserves are estimated at $2.6 trillion. It's still the world's largest, but has lost a whopping $500 billion in just a few months. You might think that this is not enough to defend against a speculative attack, but the actual amount of money available is less than $500 billion. Foreign exchange reserves are the basis for maintaining the value of the yuan. Ironically, in order to prevent the yuan from depreciating, the more the foreign exchange reserves are exhausted, the more the yuan depreciates. If foreign capital in China sells assets to avoid further losses and launches exodus, foreign exchange reserves will soon bottom out. Take, you heard my story and nodded his head. So we have to go. Apart from the corporate value, there is not much cash that OTK company can mobilize. Fortunately, there are ways to save money. Take, you asked. But what if China or Russia doesn't keep their promises after all? When things change, your thoughts change. As both are dictators, if the situation changes, they will prioritize their political position over the promises made to me. I do not care. If China had kept its promise to guarantee Hong Kong's autonomy, the current protests in Hong Kong would not happen. If Russia had followed the Budapest Agreement, there would have been no conflict in Ukraine. If you lose anyway, you lose everything. But if you win, at that time China or Russia will see us. I gathered all the employees of the company in one place. Hyunju's older sister and Ellie also attended. At this point I made an important announcement. We're going to issue $800 billion in corporate bonds. Team leader Zhang Qihong asked cautiously. 800 billion won? Since the amount is so large, it looks like I may have heard it wrong. After all, 800 billion won is a huge amount. No. Dollars. $800 billion. The expression of hopelessness soon changed to a look of astonishment. The other employees are equally astonished. Moreover, it is unprecedented to issue such corporate bonds at once. Hey, can anyone buy it? There is currently no money in the market due to the credit crunch. Several companies in need of funds have issued corporate bonds, but even AA-rated corporate bonds are often in short supply. Even if OTK company is the world's largest company and the bond market is larger than the stock market, it is not easy to sell all these bonds. So, we need to issue it on a good condition that investors will be interested in. Team leader S91 pointed out the problem. It is not easy to issue corporate bonds of that size in a short period of time. The issuance and sale of corporate bonds must be approved by the financial authorities in accordance with established requirements. OTK company is worth more than $1 trillion no matter how small. However, the company's value is high, but its equity capital and return are low. Moreover, the company value is also unlisted, so it has never been accurately evaluated. Actually, the biggest problem is something else. The Rothschilds are in control of the financial system. If you're trying to sell in the US mainland or in Europe, they'll do everything you can to get in the way. We don't have time. Actually, it should be called a bond, not a corporate bond. I plan to issue my stake as collateral. Yes. It is a stock-backed bond in which the creditor takes a stake in lieu of money if the payment is not made by the maturity date. One of the staff raised their hand. What is the purpose of issuance of bonds? I answered right away. We will fight the speculative forces who are short-selling. The staff were surprised again. I've told the team leaders once before, but this is the first time I'm telling everyone. Senior Sanjiop was making an expression as if his soul had gone out. I thought this crazy thing was over after Brexit and Big One. In both cases they fought for the fate of the company and won. How about this time? Team leader S91 said with a cautious expression. It is too early to fight the speculative forces. It's not too late to go down a little more and then respond. Hyunju Nuna shook her head as if in pain. Right now, other companies are anxious to get out, so you want to jump in? Industrial capital, which has factories in China and runs business, has no choice but to sell assets, but financial capital hastily. Buildings in first-tier cities which were difficult to buy with money until a few months ago, poured for sale at lower prices, but no one was willing to buy them and the prices fell further. I remember the prisoner's dilemma. If everyone tries to escape from the ship swaying due to the storm, the balance is compromised and the risk of sinking increases. However, if the sinking is certain, it is beneficial to move ahead of others, even if it accelerates the sinking. It is in the common interest of those on board not to sink. Someone has to stand in the middle to keep the ship from sinking. I am the largest shareholder and CEO. Therefore, I do not need to seek the consent of others for my decision. But if you can't convince even your employees, how can you convince others? I looked around the staff and said, OTK company has done many things in the meantime. However, if the global economy collapses due to the current crisis, all of the EVs, TWRS, Vermorps, Simangium and JN batteries that we have been promoting will be in vain. This work is for us, not for China or the world. If successful, we will go down in history as averting the financial crisis. Even after my words were finished, the meeting room was quiet. Everyone can't help but think about the possibility of failure. Taekyu tilted his head and spoke to me in a low voice. It's strange. In this case, we have to stand up one by one with our fists clenched and shout out words like, good. Let's try it. We can do it. Only trust and follow the SEO. Read more at wuxiax.com. Because reality is not animation. Do you have any questions? A woman with light-colored blonde hair raised her hand to my question. This seems like too much of a plan. Her father is Vice Chairman Shin Byung-do of RCK Brothers. You probably know better than anyone how serious the current crisis is and how difficult it is to prevent it. Yuri said in a trembling voice. It would be nice if it went well, but if it fails, the company will be taken over. If the money cannot be repaid, the stake passes over, and if the stake goes over, the company passes. No investment company invests in this reckless way. Even more so if you think the odds are slim. I looked at the glass and smiled at her. No worries. Elder. Ellie smiled at me. After all, it's nice to be with Jinhu because I'm not bored. Yuri, who was about to say something at those words, bit her mouth. I said, looking at Hyunju's older sister. I will ask Golden Gate to issue and sell bonds. The older sister nodded her head as if she couldn't help it. If it's a stake in OTK company, there will be many people who will covet it. But are you really okay? Of course. I then told Taekyu. You too, as a vice president, say something. 1. Taekyu, who had been thinking for a moment with his arms folded, opened his mouth as soon as he remembered what he had to say. Even if the company goes bankrupt because of Jinho Kong, we will provide you with a generous amount of severance pay, so don't worry too much, everyone. The dollar was drying up in the market as the US interest rate continued to rise. But there are still many rich people in the world. I contacted the old man who was holding the dollar directly and started selling. Hello, President Warren Boat. Haha, it's been a while. We greeted each other and got to the point. This time I am going to issue bonds with my stake as collateral and I want you to buy some. He increased his cash holdings long before the crisis began, and the Berkshire cashier has a whopping $150 billion in cash. Looking at this, the reputation of being the Sage of Edens was not just earned. If he had already heard the rumor, he asked without surprise. What are you going to do with it? I want to invest in the Chinese market. There was silence for a while at my words. China is a sinking ship. If you know the ship is going to sink, you should pack your bags and leave as soon as possible. It would be foolish to ride now. Berkshire Cashier has $100 billion in assets in China. If Berkshire Cashier sells stocks, it's also not as easy as it could be a signal that could accelerate the collapse of China's economy. President Warren Buffett was speaking as if giving his advice. The market does not move right or wrong. There are only gains and losses. Even if the odds were only 51%, I would have been on the side of OTK company. The current situation is not good enough to even say this. In the meantime, I broke everyone's doubts and distrust and made the investment a success. Can we do that again this time? The ship will not sink. If you board when others are jumping, you may be able to pick up the luggage that others have left behind. Do you really think you can prevent a crisis? In fact, even if the prediction is correct, there is a problem. Can you really find a germanium mine in the Sea of Abundance? Is it really pure matter? And can it be brought to Earth safely in time? If anything goes wrong, this plan will fail. Still, I decided to put everything here. So I answered with confidence. Yes. We can prevent a crisis. What will you do if you fail? I make a lot of money by investing and I've always had this question. Where did all that money come from and where did it go? No matter how much money you have, someone dies someday and the money goes somewhere else. The Rothschilds are trying to keep the flow in their hands. Losing money is sometimes painful like death. I am equally afraid. What happens when all the money is gone? How will the world see me? Fear gnaws at people's hearts. I closed my eyes for a moment and opened them. It doesn't matter. After all, it was money that wasn't mine. Even if you lose money, you don't lose everything. Take you, Eli, and Hyunju Nuna will still be by my side. There are things in the world that cannot be changed no matter how much money you give. For me, that is enough. If you fail, you will start all over again. As long as the market exists, you can always make money again. Hearing my words, he burst out laughing. Good. I will buy $50 billion of bonds. Thank you. It's not something to say thank you. As an investor, I am only responding because I think it is a good investment opportunity. After a year, it's good if it's repaid and even better if it doesn't. Either way, Berkshire Cashier won't lose. After the call with President Warren Buffett was over, I called another prospective buyer. Hello, Crown Prince Suleiman. This is Jinhu Kong. This time I want to sell bonds with my stake as collateral. Are you interested? The fact that Kong Jinhu issued bonds with his stake as collateral immediately spread to the financial world. The interest rate is 7% and the maturity is only 1 year. If the debt is not repaid within 1 year, the creditor will receive the OTK company stock as collateral. Hopefully this is your chance to get the whole OTK company. This was attractive enough to attract dormant investments. Grant, who heard Grace's story, said, I'm thinking of enticing investment by shortening the maturity. Does that mean she has confidence? Jinhu Kong personally met with Warren Buffett, Chairman Warren Buffett, Crown Prince Suleiman bin Salman and Korean conglomerates to sell bonds. However, since the volume of issuance was so large, the amount poured into the market was enormous. Hedge funds have already opened their eyes and started buying. You have to diversify your funds to buy bonds. It's like throwing bones full of meat to the hyenas that move with greed. Even if there is a common goal, if there is a prey in front of you, it will shake. He will use those dollars to defend against our attack. The strategy is to attack the enemy with the enemy's money. It may sound strange at first glance, but it is not uncommon in the financial markets. Right now, even hedge funds are borrowing and selling Chinese stocks and currencies to destroy China. Grace nodded her head. Even though I know it, I have no choice but to suffer. Man's greatest invention is finance. Finance makes it possible to borrow money, lend money, buy money with money, create something from nothing and make 1 to 100. The Rothschilds have grown into finance and through finance they rule the world. Jinhu Kong can only move his own capital, while Rothschild also owns banks and investment companies. If anyone takes control of the head, the body moves accordingly, so in this battle the Rothschilds have no choice but to win. Jin Hukong will not be unaware of this fact. However, there is only one reason to do this. This is because there is a card called JN Battery. He probably saw a foreshadowing of mining germanium on the moon. This will happen as it is. However, an investment that is not on time is meaningless. Space C's spacecraft will never reach the moon. As always, victory belongs to the Rothschilds. Gray muttered to himself. The foresight of mining germanium on the moon will be realized by the Rothschilds. Jin Hukong issue of stock-backed bonds. Start selling $800 billion bonds with 80% of OTK companies' stock as collateral. Warren Boat, Crown Prince Salman bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, invests in bonds issued by Kong Jin-hu. Those who heard the news were shocked. Tired. Raising $800 billion? I'm just asking and going for a double. Crazy. Burn your stake in bonds? Is that stake worth it? If OTK company is worth $1 trillion, it's cheap. MS and NPL are also worth $1 trillion. If you buy one OTK company, patent rights for Keras, OTK Games, Facet, Rosatom, TWR, OTK Battery and JN Battery are included one after another. What are you going to do with that money? Would you like to bet on the Chinese market? Surely. If you don't pay it back on time, you will lose all your shares after Gangjin. Surprisingly, Jin Hukong bought yuan and Chinese stocks in the foreign exchange market with dollars he had raised from selling bonds. Just as speculative forces gather power by announcing their position, so did Jin Hukong. The global economy will regain stability and continue to grow again. OTK company will actively purchase assets in China, including RMB. Jin Hukong has made similar remarks before. But this time not just words but actions. In a situation where hedge funds on Wall Street took a short position, she took a long position alone after the strong earthquake. Jin Hukong accepts the sale of speculators, and from the perspective of China, it has the effect of securing an additional foreign exchange reserve. Chinese media started floating after a strong earthquake every day. CCTV released a special documentary about Jin Hukong's investment success story, and the People's Daily featured Kong Jin-hu's remarks on the front page. Remarks from financial authorities continued. It is true that there are difficulties in the Chinese economy, but it is at a level that the government can control. The speculators will pay the price for ignoring the warning. Even Jin Shaoshun, governor of the People's Bank of China, appeared in front of the press. China has enough tools to use monetary policy and stimulus. The chaos is just a passing storm. Why is this bastard side with China? It's really crazy. If the Chinese economy collapses, will OTK company also collapse? Haha, OTK company is going to close. After the earthquake, I became a beggar and left again at Seoul Station and begs. If China collapses, then the world economy will collapse. America survives and the rest die. Seeing that you are on the side of the Communist Party, I admit that I am a pro-North Korean gang. I don't know if he's a North Korean or a redneck, and when he sees Kong Jin-hu appear like that, doesn't he really have confidence? Both the Russian and NATO forces are quiet. Do you think World War III was avoided? If you look at buying with such determination, it seems that China is really good. I hope Kong Jin-hu will not do anything that will harm him. Well, no matter how much Jin Hukong is, I think that would be unreasonable. If you only mine germanium from the moon, you will succeed. So it seems impossible. There were still many negative reactions, but when it became known that Jin Hukong was buying, the stock market fell temporarily and the dollar stopped rising as the preference for safe assets subsided. The calendar quickly turned to April. Taekyu looked at his monitor and said as if muttering, "April is a cruel month." Who said this? Probably a passage from a poem by T.S. Eliot. Anyway, there are a lot of otaku that I picked up somewhere. Anyway, watching the stock market plummet, I could feel the saying that April was a cruel month. Mark Twain said April was a risky month for stock investing. Really? That man is smart. For reference, I have listed October, July, January, September, November, May, March, June, December, August, and February as other dangerous months. This means that the investment is risky. The hedge fund union was determined and continued to pour short selling. Even if China pours out its foreign exchange reserves, it is difficult to prevent it. Again, it was unreasonable to support the falling foreign exchange and stock markets with only my own capital. Losses accumulated as each day passed. It was like pouring water into a poison that had fallen from the bottom. It started with determination, but seeing the balance decrease at the speed of light makes my blood feel dry. Take-You nodded his head as if sympathizing with him. It's very exciting to look at your balance these days. Always knew. Investing is the best. Seeing that he was talking nonsense all of a sudden, he seems to be under a lot of stress. It's only now that we're arguing over whether it's going to rise or fall anyway. If Space C succeeds in exploring, mining and transporting germanium, the road to recovery of the global economy will be opened. Conversely, if it fails, then it will be a situation that no one can use. I will be back. The company is doing well. Do not worry. After saying goodbye to Take-You, I crossed over to the next building. Ellie was busy working. I stood outside for a while and watched her. Working in her suit and with her hair tied, she shone on its own. She's a face I see every day, but she's pretty today. After a while, an employee who spotted me said something. Ellie stopped what she was doing and turned her head. What happened? Now I want to go to America. I came to see your face before I left. What time do we get back? After work. Ellie, ignoring the presence of other staff members, hugged me and kissed me. Come back safely. You know that health always comes first, right? Of course. By the time you come back, it will be all over. What kind of expression will I have when I step on Korean soil again? The United States and the Soviet Union, once dividing the world, waged a space race to show off their technology. The first to win was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union made the first manned space flight in 1961, and the United States was shocked. Stimulated by this, the United States announced the famous Apollo program. At the time, John F. President Kennedy's speech touched the hearts of Americans. We're going to the moon. We will go to the moon in 10 years and many other things. Not because it is easy, but because it is difficult. And as announced, the United States succeeded in sending humans to the moon in 1969. A total of 12 astronauts, starting with Neil Armstrong, stepped on the moon, installed various equipment such as reflectors and seismometers on the lunar surface, and collected 385 kilograms of moonstone and earth and brought it to Earth. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the space race ended. Nearly half a century has passed since the last visit to the moon, and mankind did not step on the moon again. In the 21st century, the need for space development has emerged again. NASA has announced Project Constellation. This was an unprecedented plan to send a manned spaceship to the moon again, and to build a base on the moon and use it as a base camp for advancing into space. The moon's gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth's. Launching a rocket from the moon has the advantage of reducing fuel consumption by that much. 14 countries, including the United States, participated in this plan. However, in 2010, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the plan was abandoned with nothing to do. However, after President Ronald took office, the plan was revived. Just as America was the first country to send humans to the moon in the 20th century, it will be the first country to send humans to the 21st century. This is the Artemis program. While the Apollo program aimed to send humans to the moon, the Artemis project went further than that, and was an extension of the Constellation plan to build a manned base capable of long-term residence on the moon and launch rockets, and to build a shuttle connecting the Earth and the moon. It should have been implemented by the end of last year if it was originally. However, the big one forced the federal government to pour all of its available budget into the California Restoration Project, leaving the space industry behind. As NASA failed to secure the relevant budget, the execution of the Artemis project was entrusted to private space companies. The company most actively participating in this plan is Space C. When I arrived in Florida, I got in the prepared car and went straight to the launch site. Since the place is a place, I had to go through thorough identification and inspection of my belongings before entering. It was still early in the morning, but Alan Everhart and Space C officials were already gathered at the launch site. I greeted them one by one. Nice to meet you. I am Amir Roshan, who is in charge of this launch. Nice to meet you, this is Jin Ho Kong. He is an Indian-American COO of Space C and head of development for Pat Phoenix. They all looked like they hadn't slept properly for several days, but their expressions and eyes were overflowing with passion. I've seen this a few times in the past with Professor Haman Kim and Professor Petrov. I was able to get close to the launch pad following the staff's guidance. The Fat Phoenix is an enlarged version of the existing Phoenix rocket, created by Everhart to realize his dream of sending humans to Mars. The structure of the spacecraft was not significantly different from that of the Apollo program. When it leaves the atmosphere, the rocket is detached and the spacecraft flies towards the moon. When it arrives in lunar orbit, the command ship remains in orbit and the lunar lander lands in the Sea of Abundance. When the lunar lander carrying the mine samples takes off and docks with the command ship, the plan is to return the command ship to Earth. Since the rover and mining robots are loaded on the lunar lander, the key is to bear the weight. Alan Everhart asked me, "How about seeing it for yourself?" Pat Phoenix boasted a grandeur bigger than any other building. It is 82 meters high, 13.6 meters wide, and weighs 1529 tons. There were 32 single-stage engines and boosters were attached to both sides of the rocket. Fat Phoenix was the heaviest of all existing rockets and was capable of carrying the most payloads. Even the godly beauty was felt on the surface of the metal, shining brilliantly in the rising sun. Even so, this rocket can be said to be the crystallization of human science. I said my honest opinion. Can this really come to mind? People burst out laughing at my words. Alan Eberhart was confident of success. It will fly well to the moon. Although he wasn't the first to build an electric car, he popularized his first electric car. And now, it is pushing ahead with electric aircraft and advances to Mars. Jan Battery will give wings to his plans. Alan Everhart's eyes lit up like a child. If the JN battery is commercialized, a drastic change will occur in the aerospace and aerospace industries. Also, starting with this work, we will build a base on the moon and use that as a base camp so that mankind will one day go to Mars. Either way, I bet the future here. Now, in a few hours, everything will be decided. Cape Canaveral Space Center, Florida, USA. Thousands of people gathered to watch the launch of Pat Phoenix. Everyone in the crowd could not help but marvel at Pat Phoenix's tremendous majesty. Launching rockets is now common enough to even talk about private space travel. However, rockets sent to the moon were as different as light vehicles and large trucks. All the media outlets around the world reported on it, and protests by civic groups against space development were held outside the launch site. Media outlets broadcast live broadcasts long before launch. CNN reporter Leah Sims said with a microphone, 30 minutes from now, Space C's Fat Phoenix will be launched towards the moon. Fat Phoenix will fly some 237,000 miles to land in the lunar ocean of fertility to mine germanium before returning to Earth. If we succeed in mining the lunar resources for the first time in the world according to this plan, it will open a new chapter in space development. The world is watching right now, as the future of the global economy can be determined by the success of Fat Phoenix. As the launch time approached, the control center became busy. Alan Eberhart and SpaceX staff continued to check the system until the very end. When it was confirmed that there was nothing wrong, the countdown finally started. Fireworks erupted with a roar, and a massive rocket worthy of its name as Fat Phoenix soared into space. People cheered and applauded all at once. Wow! Alan Eberhart let out a shout of joy, and Jin-Ho Kong smiled and shook hands with the people around him. Reporters wrote articles about the success of the launch and sent them out as breaking news. But this atmosphere lasted less than a minute. Those who watched Pat Phoenix flying through the telescope murmured in amazement. "Come on, wait. Why are you there? Why are you smoking? Something's a little strange." Smoke was coming from the bottom of the rocket and the fuselage shaking greatly was reflected on the electronic display. Alan Everhart groaned while writing her impressions. "Shit. Stop that smoke right now." The staff were confused and did not know what to do. Liquid oxygen tank pressure is soaring. The control system is not listening. Then do something. After a while, the rising flames enveloped the entire rocket, and then exploded with a roar. Burning debris fell to the ground. Everyone was at a loss for words at the unexpected explosion. Fat Phoenix, who was flying towards the moon, exploded and fell without even being able to escape the atmosphere. Alan Eberhart screaming and running rampant and Kong Jin, whose hardened expression were captured on camera. A mansion in Buckinghamshire. Grace watched Pat Phoenix explode with Grant. Jan Battery was the hidden card of Jin-Ho Kong that could prevent the crisis. However, the card disappeared from the air. The rocket exploded, and the rover and mining robots aboard the lunar craft were also shattered. As it was an unmanned spacecraft, there were no casualties, but the loss was estimated to exceed $1 billion. But the real loss is that germanium mining did not even start and ended. Even if we rush to push forward again, no one will wait any longer. There was no more means for Jin Hukong to use. He succeeded in every investment, and became the world's most famous investor and the richest person in the world. But in this one failure he lost everything. Unfortunately, that's what investing is all about. How many investors have bled out of the market during that time? Jin Hukong is just one of them. She has all her plans for the future. Rothschild purchased stock-backed bonds through a variety of channels. As the collapse of the Chinese economy is becoming a reality, Jin Hukong will never be able to repay the debt until maturity, and the stocks held as collateral will be in the hands of the Rothschilds. Even if he got his hands on OTK Company, he had no intention of letting go of the aftermath. He will still remain so and will serve Rothschild's interests with his skills. Grace turned her head again and looked at Jin Hukong's face on the TV screen. What are you thinking right now? A smile of relief appeared on Grant's face as he was watching TV. It's all over. Grace Rothschild smiled brightly. We won. Pat Phoenix exploded. Shattered debris fell to the ground. The whole world will be watching this scene as all the media's attention was focused and the launch scene was being broadcast live. Alan Eberhardt was busy trying to figure out the circumstances of the damage. What was the problem? She said as an employee in the control room ran and stuttered. The exact cause is currently under investigation, but it has been confirmed that the liquid oxygen tank pressure level suddenly surged immediately after launch. Alan Eberhardt lashed out at her staff. Damn it. So what is the cause? This appearance will be on the news as it is. The reporters all at once pointed their microphones at me and asked questions. What are you going to do now? Have you been thinking about the possibility of failure? Any other plans? Please say something. Space C's launch failed. What more needs to be said here? It was no longer necessary to remain on the launch pad. I got into the car to avoid the crowd of reporters. As soon as the door closed, the car left immediately and I leaned back against the seat and let out a long sigh. CNN News streamed on the car display. Pat Phoenix explodes in midair over and over again. At that moment the cell phone rang. As soon as the call was connected, Takeyu's voice was heard as if shouting. I'm watching the news right now. Isn't this a Rothschild thing? Well, after launch it is not uncommon for a rocket to explode. As this was an unreasonable effort, there is a possibility that an error occurred in the production process or calculation. Whatever the cause, the important thing is that Pat Phoenix exploded. Takeyu asked in a frustrated voice. Is it really all over? It's almost over. Did you know it would be like this? No, I didn't know either. Then why? I remembered the famous investment adage. You don't put your eggs in one basket. Explosion in 2 minutes and 9 seconds immediately after Pat Phoenix launch. Is it a structural defect? Is it a mistake? The cause of the explosion is presumed to be a liquid oxygen tank pressure problem. International Space Safety Improvement Association President Lewis Campbell, talent due to unreasonable launch schedule change. The rocket cannot bear the weight of the rover and mining robot. Space C moon resource mining failed. NASA asks Space C to postpone launch indefinitely until the cause is found. Rocket launch failures were not uncommon. But Pat Phoenix's explosion caused a huge aftermath. The failure of Space C meant the failure of Jin Hukong. As much as I had high expectations, I was also disappointed. When it became known that it was virtually impossible to mine germanium on the moon, panic swept the market. The stock price immediately plummeted and safe assets including the dollar jumped. But less than an hour after Pat Phoenix exploded, news that no one expected shook the world. China ICBM launch. Estimated to be launched from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in Sichuan Province. There is no notification from neighboring countries. U.S. Department of Defense is analyzing missile trajectories. While the world was shocked, the Chinese government issued an official statement. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu appeared in front of the camera and read the announcement with a determined expression on his face. Not long ago, China's National Port of Heaven successfully completed the Chang'e 8 launch. The destination is the Sea of Abundance on the moon. We will mine germanium from there. China's official statement released, not an ICBM but a spaceship. China's National Port of Heaven successfully launches the Chang'e 8 lunar probe. Secret launch at 5:30 a.m. local time in China. U.S. fails to detect China's rocket launch. defense experts, serious concerns about U.S. security? Jin Hukong, did you know in advance? The news of China's Chang'e 8 launch after the Space Sea explosion was enough to shake the world. The collapsed global economy came to a temporary halt. As it was something that no one expected, everyone responded that they did not know what to do. What? Why is China here? Wasn't it a Space Sea failure? What kind of spaceship is China? Do you have the skills to do that? If it was a Chinese-made spaceship it would explode. The one that exploded is an American spaceship. Chinese technology should not be taken lightly. In the space industry only China can compete with the United States. He continued to send spacecraft to the moon, and he said that he would send a manned spaceship within 3 years. By the way, was this really what Kang Jinhu planned? Maybe. It's not like you can launch a lunar exploration rocket in a day or two. This is 100% that Jin Hukong was working with China even before the announcement of Geratinium. Did you know that Space Sea would fail and have insurance in China? A big picture after Gangjin. It is no exaggeration to say that the entire world was watching the Fat Phoenix launch scene. This was also the case with OTK Company. The launch took place at 3:15 p.m. local time. In Korea, it was still early in the morning, but many employees went to work and watched the situation on TV. Team leader Jong Ki-hong prepared promotional materials to be sent to the press in the morning. But when Pat Phoenix exploded in midair, his mentality exploded as well. At this moment there was only one thought in my head. Ruined. In the meantime, OTK Company has been pouring out the funds raised by selling bonds to defend against speculative forces. It sold dollars in the foreign exchange market to buy yuan and emerging market currencies, and actively bought futures and options in the derivatives market. But as soon as Fat Phoenix exploded, the market began to plummet. Investors who feared that there is no way to prevent the collapse of the global economy joined the sell-off. Jung Ki-hong turned his head to the side and said, "Perhaps. Are we ruined?" "Yeah, I guess so." Park Sang-yeep recalled Kang Jin-hoo's instructions with a contemplative expression. Before and after the launch, there will be a lot of sell-offs and a crash will start. When that happens, pour out all the remaining funds and buy as much as you can. According to the instructions, they had been preparing for purchase several hours before the launch. But when the crash started I couldn't afford to buy. After finishing the phone call with Kang Jin-hoo, Taekyu gave instructions to the staff. "What are you doing?" "Buy it quickly." Shin Yuri asked in surprise. "Come on, wait a minute. Are you buying under these circumstances?" There is a saying that you live out of fear." Jung Ji-hong asked carefully. It's like living in hell, not in fear." The staff nodded his head as if he was right. Taeyong smiled and said, "No worries. I'll take full responsibility, so I'll buy it." The staff tapped the keyboard with trembling fingers. In an instant, tens of billions of dollars of purchases were signed in the foreign exchange and stock markets, but the market showed no sign of rebounding. The ever-falling market was enough to terrify people. But at that moment, breaking news broke out that China had launched an ICBM. Park Sang-yeep was perplexed. "What? Why are you flying an ICBM in this situation?" Jung Ki-hong was determined to be as it should be. "After all, the economy has collapsed, so isn't it that we should all be destroyed by nuclear war? Does that make sense?" "No. It might be possible in China for some reason." But soon the screen changed and the official statement from the Chinese government that it was a rocket sent to the moon, not an ICBM, came out. At that moment the market, like a lie, stopped falling and began to rebound. Jung Gi-hong quickly looked at Park Sang-yeep and shouted, "Did you know this would happen?" He had no idea. "But what does that matter?" Park Sang-yeep shouted as he stretched out his hands to the sky. "Damn it! I believed it." Jung Ki-hong burst into tears without knowing it. "Oh, Hyo Kang Jin-hoo." Shouts erupted throughout the company. Staff clapped, jumped in place and hugged each other. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like everyone was about to fall to the bottom of hell and barely managed to be a knight. Park Sang-yeep said, looking at the staff. "Good. Let's do it." "Wow." Taekyu looked at him with a happy expression on his face. Okay. This is the reaction I wanted. Golden Gate Korean branch. Ellie was startled by the news from the United States and China one after another and looked at Hyunju-oh. "How did this happen? Did you know?" "No. I didn't know either." Oh Hyunju, who had been silent for a moment, burst into laughter as if it was ridiculous. I thought they were still lovers, but now they are all grown up. I must have deceived everyone and prepared a card like this. Hedge funds launched an offensive, and almost all financial institutions were fleeing China. Some investment companies were taking short positions along with hedge funds to recover their losses. Among US IBS, JP Morgan was the most active in short selling. JP Morgan is known as Rothschild's main bank, with a significant portion of the stake being owned by Rothschild. On the other hand, Golden Gate has taken a neutral stance. She called her husband. Henry said in a relieved voice. I was really surprised. I wish I had prepared a card like this. I think I have to learn from both of them now. It's not over yet. It has only just succeeded in firing. All work will be completed only when the spacecraft carrying the mine samples returns. If it's Jinhu and Taikyu, we will definitely do it. Henry agreed with her. I think so too. Knowing who will win, it is clear what to do. 2 months ago, when I met with President Zhang Pinghua and Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu, I talked about JN battery and plans to mine germanium from the moon as a way to prevent the collapse of the Chinese economy. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu asked with an absurd look. You want to make a battery by mining germanium from the moon? Do you think that would be possible? Isn't China capable enough? After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, space was nothing more than an American arena. China is the country that has come up with a new challenge here. In the early days of China's space industry, the People's Liberation Army was in charge. However, as the scale grew, China established the National Port of Heaven in 1993 and started full-scale space development. Exact data are not disclosed, but it is estimated that the annual budget alone is $10 billion and the number of people involved is over 300,000. In the past, the space race was a battle for pride between hegemons. But in modern times, it has begun to take on a slightly different meaning. The space industry itself began to become money. The moon is the most important forward base for advancing into space. Just as the United States pursued the Constellation and Artemis plans to build manned bases and launchers on the moon, China also announced the Chinese Lunar Exploration Program for lunar exploration and construction of Giza. Starting with the launch of Chang'e 1 to the moon in 2007, Chang'e 3 was landed on the moon in 2013, and Chang'e 4 carrying a rover was landed on the far side of the moon for the first time in the world in 2018 to investigate the geological structure and resources of the moon. After several successful lunar missions, China's National Port of Heaven hastened the launch of Chang'e 5. Unlike the previous exploration, Chang'e 5 was scheduled to return to Earth by collecting resource samples from the lunar surface and then docking it unmanned in lunar orbit. You just need to change the spear plan a little. However, the whole process must be carried out in secret. If known, sabotage will come in by all means. Rothschild's influence extends to the United States and Europe. On the other hand, China strongly regulates foreign capital in the financial market. So the Rothschilds are trying to dominate the Chinese financial market through this. President Zhang Pinghua asked, "Do you know what it means to launch rockets in secret?" "I know. All you have to do is trick the whole world and send your spacecraft to the moon. But it's not as simple as it sounds. The basic principle is the same as for a spacecraft or an ICBM. Read more at wuxiax.com. When cargo or equipment is loaded onto a rocket that can break through the atmosphere and sent to space, it becomes a spaceship, and when it is dropped back to the ground with a nuclear warhead, it becomes an ICBM. Since launching a satellite or missile can be a provocation against neighboring countries, the international community must be notified in advance. However, in order to do this in secret, you have to take a certain amount of risk. The US and China are imaginary enemies of each other. Firing rockets in secret is revealing the most important military card to the enemy. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu said sternly, "How can you believe that germanium exists on the moon and that you can make a battery out of it?" I did not back down and responded. When I gave advice to prepare for the big one, President Ronald said the same thing. If you hadn't believed me then, what would America be like today? Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu frowned at my words but said nothing. At that time, big one was a threat that might or might not come. The financial crisis, on the other hand, is already happening. If you think about the possibility of failure, you can just sit back and watch China collapse. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu hit the table hard. Shut up your words. Do you think China can't defeat the speculators? The situation is different then and now. What is different? The enemy has become stronger. Unless I'm an idiot, I won't repeat the same mistakes as last time. Hedge funds launched an offensive with full preparations. On the other hand, the economic situation in China is worse than before. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu told President Zhang Pinghua, "The odds of success are extremely slim. You can't take risks in things you're not sure about. If the launch of Space C fails, the market will take it as my failure. Likewise, if China fails to launch a rocket, people will take it as a failure of President Zhang Pinghua." Now, China is focusing its efforts on defending against attacks from speculative forces. It would be difficult to avoid political accusations if it became known that money and time were wasted on useless things in this situation. The Communist Party justified its dictatorship by stating the achievements of economic growth. The collapse of the Chinese economy meant that the state-led planned economy system led by the Communist Party was being shaken at its root. There is already a division within the party, and there is even talk of returning to the collective leadership system. As it is unknown what kind of aftermath will strike if he fails, he too must risk his political life. I'll bet everything here. If it fails, the OTK company will go bankrupt before the Chinese economy collapses. People lie, but money doesn't lie. I looked directly at President Zhang Pinghua and said, "If you are afraid of failure, you cannot do anything. Even if it pours out foreign exchange reserves to defeat the speculative forces, do you think China will be okay? Even if we win, the Chinese economy will be in ruins. Attrition battles inflict great damage on the winning side or the losing side. China also had to bear huge losses when it defeated the speculative forces last time. Foreign exchange reserves have shrunk, consumption has slumped due to a hastily raised deposit interest rate, and many companies are on the verge of bankruptcy." Zhang Pinghua, who had been staring at my face for a while, slowly opened his mouth. "It's dry. Whether it is heaven or earth will be decided with just one match." Buckinghamshire Mansion. Grace Rothschild, speechless, watched the spacecraft exit the atmosphere. The marks on the fuselage and the word CA indicated that the spacecraft belonged to the Chinese National Air Force. Grace Rothschild, who had just been convinced of victory, quickly grasped the situation. When Fat Phoenix exploded, hedge funds began selling short to close the market, and the market was crashing as intended. However, as soon as China announced the successful launch of the Chang'e 8, the market began to rebound. Short selling was poured out to create a downtrend again, but the market recovered the decline and turned to wait and see. Grant's eyelids trembled faintly. "Did you know that Space C was going to fail? Did you even see this as a foreshadowing? Or read our number? Perhaps they have been planning since the time they went to China the other day." That said, he knew that this was going to happen before that. China was focusing its efforts on defending the foreign exchange market. But I guess he was preparing something like this from behind. China continued to be vigilant. However, the continent was wide and the financial market was more closed, so there was no choice but to limit the access to information. Considering that the work was carried out in complete secret, it is highly likely that President Zhang Pinghua ordered it directly. If things fail, he too will be unable to avoid political responsibility. Did you trust Jin Hukong enough to take on such an adventure? Grant closed his eyes and opened them. We should also consider the possibility of failure. At that, Grace bit her lips slightly. All conditions met perfectly. It was a plan that could never fail. However, a completely unexpected variable shook the market. In the market, the one with more money has an absolute advantage. The Rothschilds used capital to create huge flows and they drew a lot of capital into them. However, Jin Hukong succeeded in creating a new trend against this. It is the individual participants that move the market. People are now starting to think about the possibility of Kong Jinhu's success. Grace mumbled, "Can an individual really beat the market?" Breaking news was pouring out every moment in the news. The world is noisy. Fortunately, the stock market and the yuan depreciated temporarily stopped. I did everything I could. Now it all depends on Chang'e 8. Will it be possible to find geratinium in the Sea of Abundance and then mine it and return safely to Earth? After taking a deep breath, I got a phone call from the Kremlin. President Vysotsky spoke in a tired voice, and the interpreter delivered it directly into Korean. "How much more do you plan to surprise me? If you had known, would you have told me in advance?" "Sorry." The ruble and the stock market fell indefinitely as the economic crisis and fears of war overlapped. If I hadn't stopped the offensive by loosening the dollar in the foreign exchange market, Russia would have already declared a default. If that had been the case, there would have been an all-out war in Ukraine. By the way, are there really germanium mines on the moon? After a while you will find out. It takes about 4 days for a spacecraft to reach the moon. And after arriving in the Sea of Abundance, exploring and mining, you have to come back with samples. Russia must also hurry. Germanium will be the gold of the 21st century. Are we saying that we should also go to the moon and ask for it? Yes. If Chang'e 8 succeeds, there will be a gold rush to the moon. There is a germanium mine in the Sea of Abundance, and this mine has no owner. All you have to do is go and mine the minerals that are more expensive than gold first. As long as there is a certainty that it will make money, all countries and companies will jump into germanium mining. Space C will launch another spacecraft, and other private space companies such as Red Origin, Science Orbital, and Virgin Galaxy will also rush to launch. Europe, India, and Japan will also jump into this competition. However, those with the skills and capital to go to the moon are limited. For Russia, a new opportunity has opened up. Russia's economy is virtually identical to OPEC in terms of resource exports. The competitiveness of the manufacturing industry is generally lagging, and most of the high-tech products depend on imports. But in the space field it's a different story. The Soviet Union, the predecessor of Russia, once competed in space with the United States, and Russia, which inherited that technology, is still a space power, launching the most satellites and spacecraft after the United States and China. If you had started a war, you would have missed this opportunity. After Russia declared war on Ukraine, eastern small towns with many Russian residents declared independence and waged civil war with government forces. Volunteers to support the independence of Novorussia also joined the battle. Fortunately, the Russian regular army stopped at the border and did not enter Ukrainian territory, neither did NATO forces. At my words, President Vysotsky burst into laughter. There must be a lot of work to be done with OTK company in the future. Russia has technological prowess but lacks capital and manpower. OTK company and Korea will be able to fully support this. Of course, we have no intention of relying on China for its most important resource, germanium. If we are to continue to take the initiative, the more sources we have, the better. That way we can compete with each other and lower the price. Seosong SB Suwon Production Plant. Chairman Im Jin-yong did not go home after being released from the detention center with Jules, ate and slept with the researchers here, and tried to make battery packs and mass production lines using JN batteries. Professor Haman Kim and researchers from the OTK Research Institute also collaborated here. Creating a technology and commercializing it are two completely different things. Can be as short as a few years or as long as several decades. For example, although OLED devices were invented in 1987, it took 20 years for the product to actually be mass-produced, and it took several years for it to become popular. Chairman Im Jin-yong sighed. It's not easy to get the yield up, he said. 4 out of 5 are defective. Professor Haman Kim made a bitter expression. It's only 20%. The production method is completely different from NCM batteries as well as OTK batteries. Even a small mistake in the production process results in a defective product. This meant that it would take 5 times as much germanium to make a real good battery. It would be nice to be able to reuse the germanium by tearing off the failed product, but it was impossible because it had already undergone a chemical reaction. Each time it failed, hundreds of millions of one of germanium turned into garbage. Chairman Im Jin-yong said. We are getting a lot of inquiries from all over the world. You'll need to pull it up at least 50% to start production. Even if that happens, it won't be possible to go through a day with the germanium we have now. As soon as JN battery was announced, germanium disappeared from the market. Now even if I gave money I couldn't buy it. Anyway, this was expected. That's why I couldn't afford to mass produce it. I hope that CEO Kang Jin-hoo's plan will succeed. As the launch time approached, the employees who had stayed up all night with their eyes open gathered in front of the TV. There were sighs and groans at the explosion of Fat Phoenix, followed by shouts and cheers at the news of the successful launch of Chang'e 8. Chairman Im Jin-yong laughed as if it was ridiculous. Did you know? Professor Haman Kim also smiled and shook his head. I didn't know either, but I also think that Kang Jin-hoo is representative. I feel like I am standing in the middle of history. Maybe we are shaping the future. All of a sudden, all the researchers had their eyes shining. Until now, there were people who were skeptical about whether to mass produce or not. But now everyone is convinced. Chairman Im Jin-yong said, clapping his hands lightly. Chang'e 8 will return with germanium. Until then we must build a production line. Seosong SB will go down in history as the world's first company to release JN batteries. I got on a private plane to go to China. This time I got a call from President Ronald. Hello, President. He said bluntly. I can't say hi. It was during the NSC meeting just before. China secretly launched the rocket which the US did not detect. Even if it is a spaceship, not an ICBM, the United States has no choice but to accept it as a serious threat to national security. Somehow they said that they are quiet about the Chinese movement these days, but I guess they were preparing for something like this. They deceived me like crazy. There was sadness in the way he spoke. There is a saying that to deceive the enemy, deceive the allies first. Taekyu was the only one who knew about this plan from the beginning. No one knew except for China where the work was put into practice. Eli Tu Hyunju Nuna, Sanjiop Sr., Chairman Im Jin-yong, Alan Everhart. I still heard one voice at a time. You succeeded in persuading President Yonka Zhang Pinghua. It must not have been easy. It was easier than when I had persuaded the president before. At my words he burst into laughter. Haha. Anyway, I gave them one shot properly. Perhaps he knows too. Those who threaten by grasping his own weakness are the same opponents I fight with. How did you know that Space C was going to fail? I didn't know either. I just assumed that the Rothschilds weren't watching. I didn't know it would explode like this. I wanted to ask you before, but... Big one in this time as well. Why are you doing something so reckless? Aren't you afraid? I shook my head. No. I am afraid too. My hands and feet are still trembling and cold sweat is running down my back. In a capitalist society, money is a person's status, ability, and essential tool for survival. The more you have, the more you have to lose. Losing a lot of money is a fear that makes you think you'd be better off dead. Then why are you doing this? I remembered what I had been through. Even a single failure can lead you to the edge of a cliff. Nevertheless, I risked everything and jumped in every time. If I hadn't done that at Big One, millions of people would have died and the world, including America, would be in chaos. The same is true of this financial crisis. I remembered the sights I had seen in my dreams. Protests, riots, terrorism, wars, divisions. Why do we have to stop all these things? Are you afraid that the Korean economy will collapse together? Will the People's Liberation Army trample Hong Kong? Will war break out in Ukraine? Was I that righteous? Oh, it's all just bullshit. Seem to be known now. The reason I do this is... I am an investor. What investors do is make money by investing. And investing inevitably comes with risks. What I do is far from justice. President Zhang Pinghua or President Vysotsky is a dictator no matter how good the words are. Ronald also committed crimes worthy of impeachment. Nevertheless, none of the three have any intention of letting go of power. Perhaps after their downfall a better leader will emerge. Those with power want more power and those with money want more money. Rothschilds, hedge funds, other investors. Everyone is acting for their own benefit. So do I. There is no right or wrong, good or evil in the market. The just and good don't succeed and the greedy and evil don't fail. There are only profits and losses. Investors only move for profit. If you fail you lose everything, but if you succeed you gain everything. I couldn't see his expression because he was on the phone, but I could guess what kind of expression he had. Good luck, my friend. The private plane arrived in Beijing. Commerce manager Li Sui went to meet him directly at the airport. You worked hard to come. Long time no see. Her mouth was smiling and her expression was full of confidence. But when she looked up close, her eyes were full of dark circles and her expression of exhaustion was evident. Wrinkles look deeper these days. Perhaps he too is looking at me and thinking the same thing. It is our role to show an unshakable image in front of the public no matter what our hearts are. I got into the prepared car with him. Beijing is home to China's national port of heaven. As the space industry is closely related to military technology, the Chinese government has invested generously, and the institution in charge of China's space industry boasted a much larger scale than expected. Director Wu Keijian greeted me by holding my hand. Nice to meet you, CEO Kang Jinhu. It is an honor to meet you. I am also honored, Chief. I was able to meet the employees who made Chang'e 8 a success by following his guidance. They were secretly preparing for the launch, returning the holidays and working overtime every day. Everyone had their eyes closed and looked like they couldn't sleep, but I could feel pride and vitality in their eyes. They will know it too. That this is the only way to prevent the collapse of the Chinese economy. The spacecraft originally planned to be launched is the Chang'e 5. The reason for changing this to number 8 is partly because of some changes in the existing design, but it is probably because 8 is the number that the Chinese like the most. That's why all the Chinese people aspire to it. Director Wu Keiqian explained in person in his briefing room. In the next 6.5 hours, the lunar lander carrying the exploration and mining robots will land in the Sea of Abundance. So far, only 3 countries have successfully landed on the moon: the United States, Russia, and China. India also sent spacecraft to the moon but failed to land. He put a map of the moon on the screen. This is the Sea of Abundance. It got its name because long ago people looked up at the moon and believed that there was water here. The Sea of Abundance alone covers an area of 25,000 square kilometers. It is equivalent to a quarter of South Korea's land area. Based on the topography, there are 2 areas where double rare earth accumulations are expected. We plan to focus on these 2 areas. The world is very interested in the resources on the moon, and all of them used rover robots and satellites to analyze whether they were buried or not. The analysis of the mined minerals will be done on site, but an accurate purity check can only be done after the sample has arrived on Earth. Li Sui, Director of Commerce, asked me, "Can you really find germanium here?" There was anxiety in that voice. Others looked like they were asking the same question. I nodded. It's good to believe. Sometimes beliefs become reality. Chang'e 8 successfully landed in the Sea of Abundance. Strategy. A lunar lander separated from Chang'e 8, which entered lunar orbit, succeeded in landing in the Sea of Abundance. Chinese CCTV reported that Chang'e 8 landed safely at the target point at 3:26 a.m. local time in China and sent pictures through a telecommunication relay satellite. China's National Port of Heaven announced that it is planning to start full-scale exploration and mining of germanium by using the Yuto-3 aboard the lunar lander. Over the next few days I toured the financial markets and factories in China. Chinese state-run media actively reported this, emphasizing that the Chinese economy is in good health. In the market, optimism and pessimism were still mixed, and it seemed that they could not find a direction. I don't even know how time passed. I left the hotel waiting for the news to come. Suddenly I woke up and looked around and there was no one there. I stayed at a hotel in Beijing and I was constantly informed. When I turned on the TV, the same thing came up again. People called experts spread their knowledge, and protests by NGOs and civic groups against the development of lunar resources continued across the United States and Europe, and in front of OTK Company. Wouldn't it be the first time since Apollo 11 that so many people's eyes were on the moon? Anyway, I did everything I could. All that's left is to wait and wait. For a moment I felt extreme loneliness. Again fear crept into the darkness. No matter how calm I pretended to be in front of others, all kinds of thoughts kept running through my head. I feel as if I have walked into hell on my own. Is this your destiny as an investor? What kind of person will I go down in history? As I was sitting still in the dark, the bell rang. There is only one person to call right now. When I pressed the call button, I heard Takeyu's voice. Have we been really good so far? I make a lot of money and I save a lot of people. I laughed bitterly. Huh. Good enough. Well, almost everything you did. I shook my head. No. I would not have been able to do it without you. I'm not just saying it, it would have been really impossible if I had been alone. I remembered what had happened. He was penniless until he was discharged from the army. But one day a lot of things changed because of the future in front of me. Al-6 explosion, startup investment, Brexit, Ronald election, Big One, Nishida securities order mistake, Semangium development, etc. He has accomplished many things beyond everyone's doubts and distrust, and obtained wealth that he could not have imagined. Did I really do the right thing? What made you money and what was the end result? It felt like a long dream. All of that seemed to disappear when I closed my eyes and opened them. A spacecraft just dropped in the East China Sea, and a Chinese ship was waiting to pick it up and analyze the sample. I took a deep breath and then asked, "So what happened?" "Listen, don't make fun of me." Analysis. In that moment time stopped and the world changed. Check out the Sea of Abundance, the Geratinium mine. Distributed throughout the Burial Zone mountain range. Reserves estimated at 250 million tons. Sample analysis result, 99.99% pure substance. Seosong SB announces plans for mass production of JN batteries. China's National Port of Heaven has officially announced the success of lunar geratinium mining. In order to prevent any objection, all photos and materials which were almost confidential were released to the press. President Zhang Pinghua personally appeared in front of the press. He spoke in a calm but powerful voice. China succeeded in bringing geratinium from the moon to Earth for mining for the first time in the world. The Chinese government will take the lead in commercializing JN batteries in cooperation with OTK Company. But the presentation did not end there. President Zhang Pinghua looked at the camera and continued. China has warned on several occasions that speculators who have been short-selling in hopes of a collapse of the Chinese economy will inevitably suffer huge losses. However, hedge funds have ignored the warning and have made profits by disturbing the foreign exchange and stock markets around the world. Now you will pay the price. As soon as this announcement was over, the People's Bank of China, as if waiting, announced the exchange rate of 6.2 yuan to $1. This was an expression of confidence in the Chinese economy and a determination to completely cut off the breath of speculative forces. Before the crisis, the dollar was trading at around 6.5 yuan, but after that, the 7 yuan and 8 yuan collapsed one after another due to concerns about the financial crisis and attacks by speculative forces. The speculative forces launched an offensive to break the psychological barrier of 10 yuan per dollar. But OTK Company and the Chinese financial authorities managed to defend it by loosening the dollar to the coalition. However, it not only reversed the downward trend in the past, but also raised the yuan even more than before the crisis. The market was astonished by the unexpectedly strong action. As it is natural to sell expensive assets and buy cheap ones in the market, there is a risk that capital outflows in China will accelerate if the yuan is overvalued. But for two reasons, capital in China has stalled. First, China has succeeded in mining lunar geratinium. It is unclear to what extent this will affect the Chinese economy in the future. The second is short covering volume. In recent months, China has seen the largest number of short selling in financial history. In other words, it now meant that they had to buy back the yuan bonds and stocks they had sold short. This was a terrible nightmare for the speculators. I thought I was putting the enemy in a corner, but when I woke up I was surrounded in the middle of the enemy camp. The supply was cut off and there was no way out. Lan Shuqing, president of the Banking Supervision Commission of China, who has spearheaded the war against hedge funds in the past, said bluntly about this. If anyone wants to short sell, keep going. If they want to leave the Chinese market, leave. If you want dollars, I will give you dollars. If you want geratinium, I will give you geratinium. But no one is going to leave the Chinese market unharmed. Short selling means selling at a high price, then buying at a low price and repaying it to make a profit. But now there is a situation where you have to sell cheap, buy high and pay it back. Just as the seeds of the dollar dried up in the market during the short selling, now the seeds of the yuan have dried up in the market. When short coverings came in, overshooting occurred and in the market the yuan was traded at a higher price than the announced exchange rate. Nevertheless, the speculative forces had no choice but to buy the overvalued yuan, crying and eating mustard. As the yuan and stocks rose, screams erupted from all sides. The Wall Street Journal, which had been on the side of speculative capital, poured out articles criticizing the Chinese government. Read more at wuxiax.com. We strongly protest against China's capital market disturbance. People's Bank of China, yuan artificially overvalued. This is an obvious exchange rate manipulation, illegal. The Chinese government should immediately stop intervening in the market. Excessive government regulation destroys market trust. China must stop currency manipulation. Even large IBs such as JP Morgan have asked the US government to designate China as a currency manipulator and take retaliatory measures. Hedge funds and investment companies on Wall Street were screaming that they were going to die, but the reaction of the public watching it was cold. What are these speculator bastards doing? Short sales were fun, but now what kind of bullshit are you talking about? Fuck you, fuck you. Haha, now it looks like you're writing a shit line. When I came in I wanted to, but when I left I didn't. If the government defends, it is a legitimate investment act. If the state defends it, it disrupts the market. These bastards need to get a fuck to get their minds up. Not one or two people going bankrupt this time. Ha ha ha. Financial Times opinion. Kong Jinu 1. Strategy. As mentioned above, May this year is the most bizarre period since the financial market was created. Despair and hope, collapse and soaring, crisis and opportunity, collapse and revival alternated. All so-called experts predicted the financial crisis. As they say, there are more than 100 reasons for a financial crisis to occur. Conversely, there was only one reason why a crisis would not occur. Surprisingly, that one reason outweighed all the others. One person supported the collapsing market with his own strength and turned the tide of the global economy. It was a miracle that would never happen again in the history of the financial market. A series of recent events in the financial market can be summarized as follows. A new era has now begun. Jin-Ho-Kong War. The goal of the Chang'e project was to explore the lunar resources and return with samples. Although the design was changed in a hurry, the amount that could be carried on Chang'e number 8 was limited. The sample brought to Earth weighed only 860 kilograms, of which germanium weighed 620 kilograms. Nothing changed right away. It simply added 620 kilograms of germanium on Earth, and the price was only $150 million. This was less than 1/10 of the cost of sending Chang'e 8 to the moon. It has been confirmed that germanium mines exist in the Sea of Abundance, but there is no guarantee that they will be able to mine as much as they need. The mass production plan announced by S91 was also hard to believe. It was unclear how much the annual production was and what the yield was. However, the whole world was turned upside down just by showing the possibility. Global stock markets soared all at once, and the safe haven assets such as the dollar and gold showed a downward trend. Investment companies and economic research institutes began to analyze the economic effects that will occur in each industry in the future due to JN batteries. And battery companies started researching batteries using germanium. Countries struggled to figure out how to get germanium on the moon. The only countries that can send spacecraft to the moon right now are the United States, China and Russia. But he couldn't stay still. The European Space Agency, ESA, announced plans to send probes to the moon, and European leaders met in Paris to discuss future space development plans. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and the Brazilian Space Agency, EB, made a move to join hands, and the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, KARI, decided to pursue a joint launch with Los Cosmos. Asian currencies linked to the value of the yuan also rose at the same time. In particular, the depreciation of the won was noticeable. Similar to the financial crisis, it fell to just before 1,500 won per dollar. However, foreign capital was buying too many won-denominated assets, and there were even signs of breaking 1,000 won per dollar now. The money that Jin-Ho-Kong raised from selling bonds was used to get short sales. In the meantime, in order to prevent the collapse of the global economy, it has bought RMB as well as currencies from emerging countries at random. As the number of purchases increased, the losses increased like a snowball. Until just before, the situation was so precarious that I thought I was barely holding on. It was good to say that all the money invested in various derivatives was blown away. If the global economy went down like this, far from recovering the principal, it was absolutely impossible to repay the debt. But in an instant things changed. The sight of the stock market display board, which had been lit up with blue lights, turned red in an instant, was an amazing spectacle that was hard to see anywhere else. Jung Ji-hong muttered with a blank expression on his face. It's the first time I've seen anything like this in my life. Park Sang-yeep nodded his head. It's like looking at some North Korean card section. Jung Ki-hong turned his head to the side and asked, "How much do you think the rate of return will be?" "At least twice. Won't you make $1 trillion?" The staff looked at a loss for words in shock. It is easy to turn 80 million won into 160 million won. Making 800 billion won into 1.6 trillion won is not easy, but it is possible. But is it really possible to turn $800 billion into $1.6 trillion in just a couple of months? It was unbelievable even when I saw it with my own eyes. Shall we contact the Guinness Book of Records? What? It's an investment with the highest return in a short period of time. The bet on everything worked. OTK company made the biggest profit in the shortest time in history. This record will never be broken in the future. I woke up. I think I closed and opened my eyes for a moment, but to my surprise, 15 hours had passed. I don't know how long I've slept like this. I opened the blackout curtain. The sun was shining and it was hard to open my eyes. Surprisingly, the sky in Beijing was clear. The reason is that factories around the city have come to a standstill due to the economic crisis in the past. I looked down on the city. Cars filled the road and people were busy passing by. A day passed and the world was still the same. If you think about it, it's normal. Just because a new technology comes out doesn't mean the world will change immediately. What has changed is people's perceptions. It will take several more years for JN batteries to be mass-produced in earnest. But now everyone believed in the potential of germanium mines and JN batteries on the moon. If everyone believes it, it becomes a reality. I looked at my phone and saw dozens of calls. I called one of them. I called. Ellie said in a pleasant voice. What? I was worried because I couldn't call. Sorry. I was sleeping. The surroundings are a bit noisy. Are you at work? Absolutely. I'm crazy because of Jinhu now. I think I will have to work overtime for a few days. Again. When the market is bad, it's bad, and when it's good, so it's a financial company to be busy. That's too right. Perhaps OTK company is in a similar situation. Are you eating well? Of course. Why? When I saw it on TV, my cheeks were thick. In fact, he often skipped meals. She couldn't even remember what she ate. After hearing Eli's words, I suddenly became very hungry. Now that I'm in China, I'll have to do some sightseeing on the mainland. Ellie said jokingly. Seeing the market today, I must have made a lot of money. How do you feel when you earn that much? Not too bad. Rather, I want to see Ellie. Ellie was taken aback by my words. Really? How much? Very many. Do you have anything else to say other than that I miss you? I thought for a moment and then said, I love you. It's nice to hear that. Can you do it one more time? I've said it over and over. I love you. I love you too. You can't sell your eyes to a Chinese beauty. I laughed bitterly. I see. As soon as I hung up the phone, I thought that I should have something to eat. I washed and got dressed. When the door was opened, the guards waiting were perplexed. What are you doing? I am going to eat. I went down the elevator with the security guards to get out of the hotel, but a problem arose. At the entrance of the hotel, not only media outlets from all over the world, but also thousands of people gathered. They looked at me and screamed. Wow. Reporters pointed their microphones and asked questions. Where did you hear about germanium in the Sea of Abundance? What is the release schedule for JN battery? Tell me something about the global economy. Dozens of questions were asked at once. What's this to someone who's starving to death right now? One of the reporters asked aloud. How are you feeling now? I said frankly. I'm hungry. World stock market soars one after another. Hedge funds are going bankrupt. JP Morgan, Redstone stocks plummet due to concerns about derivatives loss. Short covering continued for a while. OTK company the highest profit ever. Estimated to reach $1 trillion in revenue. Jinhu Kong, I'm still hungry. Not satisfied with $1 trillion profit. Articles were pouring in non-stop and the internet swarmed. Kong Jinhu changed the world. Is the era of OTK company open now? If you write world economic history later, it seems to be divided into before and after the earthquake. One person has turned the tide of the collapsed global economy. This can only be explained as crazy. I'm gonna buy some stocks. Oh. I shouldn't have bought back the Chinese fund and had to ride it. $1 trillion. Making money was the easiest thing in the world. High risk, high return. He poured all his fortune on his own and received a short sale. This money is mine now. But I'm still hungry. This is the Korean speculator class. How much more do you want to earn? If JN battery is released, won't you make more money than you have earned so far? I want to get a job at OTK company. Many people were relieved and cheered for the recovery of the financial market. But not everyone could laugh. A terrible situation unfolded for hedge funds that had been selling short in hopes of a global economic collapse. Falling from heaven to hell was instantaneous. The Chinese financial authorities did not even give them room to liquidate their positions. There was even talk that the announced exchange rate, which was 6.2 per dollar, could be raised to 5.5. He was determined to raise the value of the yuan as much as possible in a short period of time and put an end to speculative capital. Hedge funds that have been selling short in the Chinese market have suffered an irreversible blow. It was meaningless to estimate the amount of damage. Margin calls came in as the margin decreased, but there was no way to save money anymore. Albert Management CEO Carl Singer continued to contact Rothschild for information and support, but was unreachable for several days. "Damn it! Why aren't you contacting me?" On the other hand, calls from big-name investors flooded. Until before, they came from all over the place with money, and everyone was anxious because they couldn't invest. But now, everyone was anxious to recover their investment. Unfortunately, he wanted to return his investment, but had no money to return it. At this time, even short sale repayment was not possible. At this rate, bankruptcy is inevitable. He reached out to private equity fund Schnitz Investment CEO Paul Schnitz to discuss a response. But as soon as the other party answered the phone, he started yelling. How can this be? You hit us in the back like this. What do you mean? Rothschild-owned banks bought a lot of futures and options we had been selling. What? Since last month I liquidated my position and escaped. No, that's absurd. No way. Damn it. You said you would win unconditionally, but now it looks like we're all going to die together. Finally the phone hung up. Carl Singer, who had been silent for a while, smiled involuntarily. Ha ha ha. After founding Albert Management, he did anything to make money. Just before bankruptcy, he bought state bonds at a bargain price and then seized private planes and ships to receive the full principal and interest, and even ripped off international support for children's vaccinations to make a profit. Despite all kinds of criticism, he didn't blink an eye. His belief was that there is no right or wrong, neither good nor evil, neither enemies nor allies before money. And the Rothschilds acted on that belief. Instead of pushing others into limbs at the last minute, they created an opportunity to escape. He was just a long-term horse that was used and thrown away. Only then did Carl Singer realize that he had been abandoned. He said, "I thought he could get everything." What was once held in the hand suddenly fell through between the fingers. He reached out to grab them again, but to no avail. What's wrong with that? Everything was perfect. Could never fail. Yet it failed. No matter how I thought about it, there was only one reason why this happened. Something simmered in her chest. Carl Singer let out an unbearable, painful scream. Jin Hukong.